Hello everyone, and welcome to the Synology Partner Online Training. We have an awesome topic for everyone here today. We're going to be touching base on our new Synology Router Manager version, SRM 1.3, and we'll be taking a look at how this new operating system version integrates with our existing router structure as well as our brand new RT6600AX router, which is our first Wi-Fi 6 enabled router. Quick introduction, my name is Cody. I'm a product manager here at Synology, and I'm going to be your guide for this one this time around. So for the agenda here today, we're going to first take a look at the hardware that goes along with utilizing our Synology Router Manager software, or SRM, and we're going to be looking at some new introductions to our award-winning lineup. We're then going to be taking a look at the software that is incorporated into the Synology Router Manager platform and see how they can work for your small business or even for your home. We're then going to round things out by taking a look at how SRM can help out in a disaster recovery scenario by taking a look at some practical uses of our VPN during disaster recovery. This is going to be particularly valuable to all of our partners that might be watching today, especially if they need to spin up some resources off-site for one of their clients. So let's dive right into the Synology router hardware. Now, the RT6600AX is Synology's first Wi-Fi 6 enabled router, and this is one of the most requested new solutions from our Synology community. So thank you to all of you who put in the feature requests for this new bit of hardware. And we're really pleased to be bringing you this at this time. Now, as you might remember, I was your guide for the Synology 2022 Connect session that initially introduced this new router. So I'm going to be taking a deeper look today since we're actually talking about it inside of our Synology Partner Online Training platform here today. Now, in this section, we're going to be taking a look at the hardware associated with the RT6600AX, new specs that it has, and also we're going to be taking a look at a platform overview because the chassis is new in this solution. We're also going to be taking a look at some different mesh configurations you can set up with this new router and SRM 1.3. You have some different options for being able to utilize wired or wireless setups, and in future versions you're also going to be able to incorporate other models into your mesh setup like the RT2600AC alongside the RT6600AX in the same mesh platform. Lastly, in this section, we're going to take a quick look at DS Router, which is allowing you to use a separate device like your smartphone or tablet to actually manage your router on the go. What you're going to notice with this DS Router solution is you're actually able to do pretty much anything you're going to see today directly through that app, including managing your VPN and authorizing safe access requests, for example. So let's go ahead and look at the RT6600AX router. Now, what you'll notice is that the chassis is indeed different. It comes with pre-installed antenna, and alongside the back, you're going to see a very similar setup from the RT2600AC, but what is different is the LAN 1 port actually has a slightly different label on top of it, and that label says 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. And now what that means is that there is more bandwidth associated with this specific port on the back of this router. Now, what you can use this for is a couple different things. You can actually utilize it as a wired backhaul for your mesh setup to give more bandwidth to that solution there, or you could use that port to actually plug into a high-speed NAS utilizing one of our expansion cards, for example. A lot of Synology expansion cards have support for 1, 2.5, 5, and even 10G all within one card. So taking a deeper look at the hardware architecture of the RT6600AX router, you'll notice that there's a quad-core processor built into the unit, which gives it snappier management and fast connection speeds even with multiple devices connected and with multiple SRM services enabled. From safe access to safe browsing to even the VPN Plus server we're going to take a look at a little bit later. There's also support for tri-band Wi-Fi, which allows for easy distribution of devices between the radios built into the router, which ultimately optimizes both range and performance without hitting the same bottlenecks you might get with a different router manufacturer. Also, the RT6600AX router is wall mountable, which was a feature request from the Synology community, so thank you all for your input on that. What I really like about this wall mount solution is it's directly integrated into the chassis, which means you don't have to worry about any external brackets when you actually go to wall mount the device itself. Now, in terms of the different mesh setups, you have a couple different options. On one hand, you have a wireless setup, which might be what many of you go for originally because there's less planning involved. There's no wires that you have to get out to the different node locations. But there's a limitation here with the wireless setup. You can only go up to 6 nodes using this wireless setup. Whereas in a wired setup, there's a little bit more planning involved because each device has a direct connection, but you can have more nodes, up to 12 nodes in a wired setup, allowing you more coverage. There's some other considerations as well. Synology recommends to do a wired setup in your environment because if you're doing a fully wireless setup, range between the nodes as well as walls in the way can have an effect on the overall performance of your mesh environment. So what that means is if you have a node that has a weak connection back to one of the other nodes, then every device that might connect to that node with the weak connection will also have slower speeds than they would if it was a fully wired setup. So we definitely recommend using a wired setup and even using the 2.5 gigabit port on the back of the RT6600AX router as your mesh backhaul. Now, inside of SRM 1.3, there's already support for the RT6600AX router to enter into a mesh environment with itself, another RT6600AX router model. However, in future iterations of SRM in 1.3.1, there will also be support to mix and match, have an RT6600AX router pair with an RT2600AC router in a mesh environment, as well as the MR2200AC router in a mesh environment. So please look forward to that and keep an eye out in our newsletters for that new update down the line. Now, there's one last component to this whole hardware environment with SRM, and that is, of course, the hardware you bring to the table, and that's your smartphone or your tablet. With the DS Router application, you can actually manage almost every aspect of everything we're about to look at today, from authorizing safe access requests to even enabling or disabling your VPN. You can do everything on the go utilizing the DS Router application. So we're going to take a closer look at Synology Router Manager 1.3 and the different software that is included with the platform. While the RT6600AX router is a great solution with a quad-core processor and support for the latest Wi-Fi 6 standard, it is SRM 1.3, this new version that is behind all of the improvements to the Synology Router ecosystem. So we're going to start off by taking an introductory look at Synology Router Manager, or SRM, which is the operating system of all of our Synology routers across the board. We're then going to look at Safe Access, which allows you to create network restrictions for monitoring your users that utilize your networks. We're then going to look at VPN Plus, which is a powerful VPN server included with SRM that gives you secure remote access to your network assets. We're then going to round things out by taking a look at 802.1q VLAN, which is now supported in SRM 1.3. In short, this allows you to create virtual or logical networks to segment your activity. So, to start off, SRM, or Synology Router Manager, is an award-winning operating system that is actually based off of DSM, which is the operating system for our NAS devices. So what's really great about the Synology Router Manager solution is that it is a windowed operating system, so it feels a lot like a desktop operating system. So now, by choosing a Synology router, gone are the days of you navigating through archaic web pages from other router manufacturers. You have an easy and intuitive operating system to work with to get any operations done that you need in terms of your router management. Now, SRM 1.3 brings several optimizations to this environment. First off, you get increased max throughput by upgrading to SRM 1.3 and even higher concurrent connections, with even the RT2600AC, for example, seeing up to 92% increase in connections per second. Also, there's faster VPN performance in SRM 1.3 with the introduction of the ChaCha Cipher Suite. So here we are in SRM, which is our router operating system. You'll notice right away it looks very similar to DSM, which is our NAS operating system, because it is based off of that. You'll see a couple different applications already on your desktop, but we're going to get to many of those in just a bit. The main point of this demo is to show you the two main locations that you're going to be controlling your router from. The first of these is actually Network Center, and this can be where you change a lot of your network settings of the networks that your router actually manages. So on this main status page, you can see your general connection to the internet. You can see we're green and good to go, and you can also see some performance metrics below that. Under internet, you can see that we're getting some readings for upload and download speeds to the greater internet, for example. On the left-hand side, whenever you go over to the Internet tab, you're going to be able to change some settings there if you needed to. For us, we're going to leave our primary interface connection to our ISP, for example, to auto, but you could manually enter that if you needed to. Now, under the Smart WAN tab, this is actually one of my favorite features inside of SRM, and you're actually able to create a WAN failover environment. You'll notice our WAN connection is actually disconnected, but we can select our mobile network for our secondary interface so that we could use that as our main connection out to the internet. Now, what this means for your organization is you could have your primary cable modem and a cellular modem connected as your secondary internet connection. And so if anything happened to your primary connection, you could have it fail over to that cellular modem and keep things running. Now, under Quick Connect and DDNS, this is where you configure external access or remote access to your Synology router using one of these services. Now, Quick Connect is very easy to set up. It's pretty much the same process on the router as it is on our Synology NAS devices. You go ahead and enable Quick Connect, sign into your account, agree to the terms and services, and you're able to apply a Quick Connect address of your choice. For us, we're going to stick with the spot-ax.quickconnect.to address for our Quick Connect solution. Now we can access our Synology router through that Quick Connect address. Another option you have for remote access is through the DDNS service. And what this is great for is if you have a dynamic IP from your internet service provider, because that can change, and DDNS helps to keep track of that and keeps your hostname that you select here up to date with that changing address. So we're going to select Synology because this is a complimentary service we offer, and we're going to select a hostname for this DDNS address. We're going to stick with spot-ax.synology.me. You can also agree to the terms and services here and request a certificate to be applied to that domain that you just selected. So now we've added in our DDNS address and we've got that all taken care of. There's a couple other things you can do in Network Center, like port forwarding is going to be where you want to go if you want to forward some ports to other devices on your network. And there's a couple other settings that you can address along the top. Now, local network, we're going to get into a little bit later during our VLAN demo, but you can add in additional local networks here. Underneath traffic control, you get a good snapshot of what devices are actually connected to your various networks, and you can throttle them as you need or prioritize other ones if you need to. Under security, you're going to see there's a couple different settings under general for your logout timer. Firewall is a setting that we're going to look at a little bit later whenever we deal with our multiple networks, and we're going to create multiple rules as we need. But under auto block, this is a really important feature to have enabled on the Synology routers and on Synology NAS alike. You want to make sure auto block is enabled to help combat any brute force attacks. Now, operation modes, you're going to be able to change from wireless router to access point, but for us today, we're going to stick with wireless router. So now as we open up Control Panel, this is the second location that you're going to control your router from. And this is mainly system level things like what file services and other services are actually enabled on this device right here. Now, under user, domain, and LDAP, you're actually able to deal with the users that are available on your Synology router. So you can have this router join an existing Active Directory domain or LDAP service and have those users imported into the system. The reason why you'd want to do something like this is then you can use your domain credentials to log into the VPN server, for example. Now, under notification, we're going to enable this with a Gmail address, for example, but you definitely want to put in some sort of email address into your notifications tab right here so you can actually receive notifications from SRM. Last but not least, we have the system tab right at the bottom. This is actually going to be where you can update the system. And you'll notice right now for us, we actually have an update pending that we can actually apply to our system. So we're going to go ahead and do that right here. Now that we have that update all applied, our system is up to date and we have enabled our notifications. So we can stay plugged in to our Synology router no matter what. Next, we're going to take a look at Safe Access, and this in and of itself is an award-winning internet control system because of how intuitive it is. But it's not just a parental control for home users to restrict their children's access to the internet. It also works great for business users and managed service providers who might be managing their clients' networks. Now, the reason being is there's granular reporting and notifications. Your stakeholders at your client site can receive reports and notifications if there's access to restricted websites, and likewise, your technicians back at HQ can also receive those reports and notifications. There's also an internet scheduling option, so you can actually turn off internet access for certain profiles based on the time you set here. What I also like about the different scheduling options inside of Safe Access is you can create these different access profiles and actually schedule when they're in effect. So you could have one type of access profile go from 8 to noon, and then after that have it be a completely different access profile if you wanted. There's also time quota options, which is a great solution because you can restrict the amount of total time a user has access to the internet, for example. Lastly, there's also website filters, and there's a lot of pre-made website filters inside of Safe Access that you can utilize and apply those to your network users. But you can also create custom ones and type in specific domains if you wanted to restrict access to those websites. So let's go ahead and take a look at Safe Access and demo all of these great features. So here we are back in SRM, so let's go ahead and open up Safe Access and build out an access profile for our network users. You'll notice that we don't have one yet created, so we're going to hop over to the Profile tab and click the plus symbol and click Start. We're going to follow through this wizard to get this profile created. You have a couple different ways to apply this. You can do it on a user-by-user basis, or you can apply it to entire networks like we're going to do. We're going to apply it to our network 1, which is the primary network inside of SRM. Now, in this loading screen, what SRM is doing is it's actually scanning the network to see what devices they're actually going to apply this profile to. We're going to hit Set Access Rule to customize it, and keep in mind, everything under the guest network is what we're going to be applying this profile to. Underneath Internet Schedule, we're going to be able to set a period of time where we don't want those devices to access the internet at all. So we can click the blocked color right here, this gray one, and actually highlight periods of time when we don't want these devices to access the internet. And this is a really granular timetable that you can use to meet your organization's needs. Next, under Web Filter, these are going to be the websites and website categories that you actually want to block using this profile. As we enable it, there's already some pre-made categories that you can utilize to meet your needs. One for children, there's one for employees and guests, and even a custom one. As you hover over each one, they're going to give you a quick little blurb about what categories it's actually blocking. Before we dive into the custom one, let's click on this button right below for further customization. You can actually apply these web filters to specific periods of time. So you can select one period of time and apply whichever web filter you want. And you can do a different web filter for later on in the day. So if your organization had different web filtering needs as the day progressed, you can get that applied here. So now that that is all explored, let's go ahead and hit OK and actually check out the custom category right here for web filtering. We're going to add in a new one in our case. And we're going to go ahead and name it and keep this as a blocking web filter. Now you can choose all the different categories that you actually want blocked. You can select everything or deselect some if you have specific needs for that website category. Let's say you're in advertising, or you're a sports broadcaster, or a social media marketer, for example. You could disable the blocking for that website category. Keep in mind though, if you only wanted people to access specific social networks, for example, you could block other ones in the next menu and do it specifically by domain right here. You're able to type in that domain in this address bar and block that website and that domain specifically. Now once we hit apply, that's going to fully create this web filter category here. And underneath Safe Search, you can enable Safe Search to have extra protection whenever people are searching in YouTube, Google, Bing, and even DuckDuckGo. Now that that's all complete, our profile is now done. Web Filter tab is just a list of all the web filters you have created. Your access requests are anytime someone has requested to access a website that they reached that actually was blocked via that web filter. You can disable this option if you needed to under Settings. Now under block page style, you can actually customize the way that block page looks whenever someone gets to a website that was indeed blocked. And under security, you're able to enable network protection using a threat intelligence database, and you can also enable Google Safe Browsing. Make sure you click the Learn More button to actually follow along with that and actually get that enabled. Now, if you go to the exception list, this is going to be anything that you want to keep out of that safe browsing feature. So if you wanted to have a specific domain or IP outside of that safe browsing feature, then you can definitely do that there. Now underneath activity, you can see what has been blocked. You have a great system log like everything else in the Synology ecosystem. And you have a reporting tab where you can manually generate reports, or you can create a scheduled reporting task. Now this is great if you have multiple people that want to have some sort of report of the overall network activity in your environment. It'll be good if you have a network admin or if you have a managed service provider that wants to keep a close eye on that. And you can schedule these specific reports to happen on a specific day and at a specific time on top of that. So now that we've got that report all finished up right there, let's go ahead and check out settings, some of the final features inside of Safe Access. As we click on settings, the big thing that I want everybody to know is that you have a custom little window here for actually setting up your notifications. Now remember, in Control Panel, we already set up our notifications in our environment, so we're already going to get emailed using that notification feature, and you can change what Safe Access would actually be emailing you underneath this Notifications tab. Lastly, you also have the option to back up and restore your configuration in Safe Access. The reason why this function is here is because Safe Access has a lot of features in it, and if you spent all this time setting up all of these profiles, you want some way that you can easily restore them in case something were to happen. So definitely, after you have Safe Access completely set up, go ahead and take a backup of that so you can restore it if you ever need to. Next on the docket today is Synology's VPN Plus server. And this is one of my favorite functionalities inside of Synology Router Manager because it's actually included with your router operating system. Now, a lot of other router manufacturers out there will actually charge you additional fees, either in an upfront cost or a subscription fee to actually utilize their VPN functionality. But with Synology, the VPN server and the licenses are all included. Now, VPN Plus has access to a lot of different features like support for OpenVPN and other standards like IPsec and others. And it also has support for Synology-specific VPN types like SSL VPN, which uses a client, WebVPN, which doesn't use a client and allows you to actually VPN into specific network assets with a click of a button, and even remote desktop options. On top of that, the VPN Plus server also has support for up to 40 client licenses inside of your VPN server, and you can have up to 40 users at once concurrently connecting back to your Synology router to access those sensitive network assets. So let's take a look at VPN Plus and demo all of the setup for these different VPN types. So here we are back in SRM once again, and we're going to open up our VPN Plus server. We've already downloaded and installed it from our package center, and we're going to go ahead and open up the admin portal for this VPN Plus server. On this main screen that initially opens up, it's going to be a brief description of the different types of VPNs that are supported in the Synology VPN category, like the Web VPN, the SSL VPN, and the remote desktop options inside of VPN Plus. We're going to go into depth on those in just a moment. On this main screen is going to be an overview screen and a quick look at the overall health of your VPN Plus server and the overall traffic that's being brought through that. But before we get started, we're going to go ahead and activate the rest of our complementary license. So underneath the license menu, underneath the client VPN access licenses, we're going to go ahead and activate the rest of our licenses to be able to get up to 40 client users. So as we go ahead and navigate through this wizard, we're going to go ahead and accept the terms of service. And we now have a total of 40 licenses that we can use for VPN activities on this Synology router. Likewise, you can also add in licenses for site-to-site VPN. And again, these are also complementary inside of the VPN Plus server. So we're going to authorize our Synology account once more to get this other license applied. All right, now our licenses are all applied for our environment. So what we're going to now do is go ahead and head back over to the Synology VPN environment in just a second. And now that we have the Synology VPN category open, we can begin configuring these different VPN types. So for each one of these types, it's as easy as enabling this checkbox and following the tutorial that is provided right at the very top. You can change some other settings as we go down, but keep in mind, the whole reason why we added in that DDNS address earlier was so that we had a self-owned domain that could be applied to these different VPN portals. So as you can see, there's some other settings here to change the default port if you wanted to. You could also change different TLS options if you needed, disable duplicate logins, and even enable split tunneling inside of this SSL VPN. Once that's all enabled and done, we can continue on to enable other different features inside of VPN Plus, like enabling remote desktop, for example. And you'll notice that there's a different port for remote desktop that you can change also in this menu. Now, keep in mind, we're going to be adding in the remote desktop destinations once we actually get into the VPN Plus portal in just a second. Now, under Web VPN, this is going to be the clientless VPN option, and we can enable it right at the top like we have for our other ones on top of that. But you'll notice at the bottom there's an option for adding in a certificate, but there's a star at the beginning of it. And what this means is it's asking you to add in a wildcard certificate in this case. So if we follow along with this next wizard, we can actually get a certificate from Let's Encrypt. And there's actually an option to add in a wildcard certificate right at the bottom for the subject alternative name. Keep in mind though, you need to use a Synology DDNS address, a Synology.me address to apply for a Let's Encrypt wildcard certificate in this case. Now, once that's all done, we've set up the basic back end for the different VPNs. So we're going to go ahead and click apply at this time. But we also need to configure the web VPN portals, which are the actual web VPN destinations on our network that we want those buttons to actually lead to. So we're going to open up the web VPN portal and start to add in different directions for this VPN web portal to go. So let's say we had an asset inside of our network that we wanted to provide web VPN access to. Let's say we wanted everyone to have access to our virtualization environment, a VMware environment. So we're going to type in the portal address and the portal name that we want for this web VPN button. And we can apply it to specific users and even domain users if your router is joined to a domain. So we're going to apply that to myself. And we're also going to show this button in the default port so everyone has access to it. So now that that web VPN is in there and we have the button applied to it as well, whenever we get to that web VPN portal, we'll be able to reach our VMware environment at the click of a button. So here we are logging into our VPN Plus web page, and you'll notice that the first time you log in, you're actually greeted with a brief description of the types of VPNs available to you. Once you've read through that, you can go ahead and click Got It, and you'll be dropped into the web VPN category. And you'll remember we already set up a web VPN portal button for our vCenter environment, our virtualization environment. So at the click of one button, we're able to gain remote access securely to this sensitive remote device. And that is, again, our virtualization environment. So it's just like we were interacting with our VMware environment from a local device that is on the same local network. So we could log in as normal and manage and interact with those VMs. Now that we've seen what WebVPN can do, let's go ahead and hop back over to the VPN Plus webpage and take a look at SSL VPN. Now, before we dive into actually dialing into this SSL VPN, we need to set up our PIN code. So make sure you set it to something that you can remember. And now that we've set our PIN code, we're going to enable all three of these checkboxes because it's going to make things a little bit more stable. We're going to auto-connect through SSL VPN on login. We're going to reconnect if the connection is lost, and we're going to keep the connection alive even if the browser is closed. Once we're dialed into this SSL VPN connection, our computer is now going to act as if it's on the same local network as all of the remote devices that we're trying to gain access to. So what we're going to do to prove this is we're going to open up another web page in another tab, and we're going to access a remote Synology NAS using just its local IP address because our computer is acting as if it's on that same local network. And there you have it. We use that local IP address to get to the NAS's login screen. Now that we've checked out SSL VPN and WebVPN, let's hop back over to the VPN Plus web page and actually set up a remote desktop connection. So we're going to go ahead and open up Remote Desktop and create a new connection since we don't have one created yet. And whenever we open up the creation menu right here, you're going to be able to name this remote desktop connection. We're going to just name it Windows 10 Spot, and we're going to be able to set up what remote address this actual device has. So I'm going to type in the IP address. There's a couple other settings you can enable like full screen mode and change the image quality. We're going to leave pretty much everything the same. Now once we hit apply, we can just go ahead and click on the Windows 10 Spot device right there, and we'll type in our username and password for this device. And once we do so, we're going to be greeted with the Windows login screen showing the power of VPN Plus. You have WebVPN, SSL VPN, and remote desktop options, which are all powerful features in a simple to use package. Alright, it's the moment we've all been waiting for. We're about to dive into 802.1q VLAN support inside of SRM 1.3, which now fully supports this standard. We're about to give you some example scenarios of how you can use VLANs in your environment, but keep in mind this list is in no way exhaustive of how you can use this new and powerful feature. Now, first on this list is you can use VLANs to create a third Wi-Fi network that is separate from your primary and guest networks. What this would allow you to do is you could isolate smart devices on this IoT network, like a smart TV or an IP camera, from more sensitive equipment on your network. You can also use VLANs to create a home office network to isolate work and home internet activity from each other. What's great about this is you can easily isolate these two networks with a simple checkbox right in the menus in SRM. Lastly, another great way to actually utilize VLANs in SRM is you can integrate with existing VLAN structures. Let's say you're an SMB with managed switches and you've been using VLANs for quite some time. The Synology device can easily integrate with those existing VLANs with the full support for this 802.1q standard. So we're about to dive into some different example scenarios and demos of how you can actually utilize this feature inside of SRM. So here we are back inside of SRM, and we're going to be creating a third network for IoT devices and restricting traffic between that network and our primary network with some exceptions. So we're going to go ahead and go into Network Center. We're going to go to Local Network and hit Create to get this started. We're going to, of course, name this network IoT Network. We're also going to change the local IP scheme to just 3.1. And we're also going to change the VLAN ID to reflect that to VLAN 30. We're going to leave the option to allow managing Synology router through this network unticked because we don't want IoT devices and things that are a part of that network to have access to the SRM management. We're also going to disable the enable network isolation option because we want to have some communication between the network. We have to have some exceptions that we'll get to in just a second. Now we can apply a specific port to be a part of this network, especially if that port's connected to a switch, you'd want to do this. So we're going to actually have port 3 as a part of this network, but keep in mind you could not do that to make it completely wireless. You can also set up a Wi-Fi name for this environment, but you could also skip this step if you wanted to keep it a completely wired network. Now on the next screen, you're going to be able to check in on all of the different settings that you enabled for this and apply. And now it'll be a few seconds before everything refreshes, and we're going to log back into SRM and check our work to make sure everything's good to go. So in Network Center, we're going to go back to the local network, and you'll see that we have that IoT network at the ready, and we're going to be able to utilize it for our IoT devices. Now, if we go to traffic control, we can take a look at some of the devices we're going to set up some firewall rules for. We have our laptop and also our printer. So we're going to set up some rules so that the laptop can still communicate and print to the printer, but everything else is restricted. So what we're going to do next is go to security and set up some firewall rules under the firewall tab. So first, we're going to create a PC to printer firewall rule. So we're going to name it just like that. And we're going to begin setting up the network interfaces for the source. So we're going to choose LAN and we'll hit select, and we're going to choose the primary network. We're also going to do a specific IP address of the computer. So this is the PC's IP address. So we're going to do select IP and enter in the IP address of this PC. Now, once that's all complete, we're going to go ahead and hit OK next. And we're going to go ahead and leave the ports on all in our case. So now we need to configure the destination of all of this. So we're going to scroll down to the destination portion. And underneath the network interface, we're going to choose LAN. And we're going to select the IoT network in this case. Now for IP address, we're going to do select specific IP once again. And we're going to type in the IP address of the printer, which is a 3.57 address in this case. Now that that's all completed, we're going to hit OK, and we're going to go all the way down to the bottom and make sure that our action is set to an allow rule. The reason being is we want the PC to actually have the ability to print to the printer. So we're going to leave that on an allow rule and hit OK. And now we need the extra rules to begin isolating any other traffic inside of this network. So now we're going to name this new rule primary to IoT. We're going to go down to LAN and select our LAN that we want involved in this, and that is going to be our primary network for the source. We're going to leave everything else the same. And in the destination, we'll choose the IoT network as the LAN and leave everything else the same and actually deny access in this pathway. So now we've denied access for everything else from primary to the IoT network. And now we're going to do the exact opposite, deny any traffic from IoT to the primary network. So we're going to choose LAN and choose our IoT network as our specific source. We're going to leave everything the same once again. Now in the destination, we're going to choose our primary network, network 1, and leave everything else the same and also deny this rule. So now we have set a full network isolation from primary to IoT with the exception of the PC to the printer. Keep in mind the order in which the actual firewall rules are actually important. So if you have your PC to printer on top and the other two below that, that is the correct order. You want the most important firewall rule at the top because that'll be executed first. So now we've fully set up an IoT network that completely isolates traffic between that network and our primary while still allowing the traffic of our PC to our printer. As you can see, we're in surveillance station right now, and we're getting the camera feeds, which is a good thing, but we want to isolate our IP cameras off of our primary network. As we hop back over to Synology Router Manager, we're in traffic control in Network Center, and we can see we have tons of cameras listed that are part of Network 1, our primary network. And luckily, they're all plugged into a switch on port 4 of the router. So we're going to edit Network 3, our IoT network, and actually apply it to Ethernet port 4. Now, every camera attached to that switch on that port are now a part of Network 3, that IoT network. Now what we need to do is set up that one-way firewall rule so that we can still receive camera streams on our NAS without those same IP cameras becoming an attack vector for our primary network. So under Security, Firewall, we're going to go ahead and hit Create. And once we have this creation menu open, we're going to go ahead and name our firewall rule. We're going to go ahead and name it IoT one way in our case. Now that that is all done, we're going to go ahead and choose our source LAN, and that's going to be our IoT network. And now we're going to choose our destination network under LAN. We're going to choose our primary network, network 1. Now that that's all done, we're going to choose a deny for the action itself so that anyone on the IoT network, they can't directly access the assets that are on network 1. So we're going to go ahead and save and then hop back over to surveillance station, and we should still see our camera feeds, and we do. So that's great. This is an expected behavior. Now what we should expect to see is if we switch our Wi-Fi network to the other one, we should lose connection to surveillance station because we're not able to communicate from the IoT network to our primary network because that firewall rule was created. So as we log into the IoT network here, we're now going to go ahead and refresh the page, and we should get no access to our NVR in this case. And that's great. That's the power of VLANs in SRM 1.3. You can really isolate and lock down your sensitive materials from more vulnerable things like the IP cameras in this case. Now, another great way to utilize 802.1q VLAN support inside of SRM 1.3 is to actually integrate it with the existing VLAN structures that you might have at your organization. And what we mean by that is a lot of larger organizations might already have VLANs in place through the use of managed switches. And they might be using them to do something like organize their teams that might be on different floors or connected back to different switches. Now, the Synology router, since it fully supports this standard, is it actually can accept and translate VLAN traffic over a trunk link, which means that you can still integrate the Synology router into this existing ecosystem without actually taking up tons of different ports. You can actually trunk it all on a single port, like the 2.5 gigabit port, for example. Now, what this means is that the Synology router can integrate into this system in the logical topology without actually taking up additional physical ports. And that's really just the main spirit of VLANs in the first place, is to have a logical topology that isn't constrained by the physical topology on your network, like how many ports you actually have on your switches. All right, let's dive into our final section for today. We're going to take a look at how SRM 1.3 and VPN Plus can be incorporated into your disaster recovery plan. Now, in this section, we're going to first go over what are some of the challenges associated with disaster recovery, especially with off-site restoration, and then we're going to talk about the solutions to solve these challenges and solve these problems associated with recovery. So as you're working through a disaster recovery scenario like this, there's going to be several things that are top of mind as you look to solve this problem. Now, let's imagine in this scenario you have a critical piece of infrastructure go down, like a server, for example, and luckily you had some backups that you're able to fail over to and restore from off-site. Let's say you restored that server as a VM, for example. But you might still have some functional equipment on the primary site, like endpoints, that need to communicate back with that server. So you need to find some way to get the two locations to talk to each other. And you want this communication to happen the most secure way possible. Lastly, you want this to be easy to set up and available on demand, so you're not working through config files or a command line to get this communication established. So your workflow is going to look something like this. Step 1, you're going to identify the problem and see what went wrong. Step 2, you're going to actually restore from your backups off-site and spin that critical infrastructure up as a VM, for example. You then want to create a secure tunnel between the two locations, at which point you continue working. But in the Synology environment, it's going to look something like this. It's actually going to use a couple different components. At both sites, you're going to be utilizing Synology NAS and a couple applications there. At your primary site, you'll be using Active Backup for Business to pull backups for your endpoints, your servers, and your VMs that might be at your primary site. You can then use Snapshot Replication to replicate to a secondary Synology NAS at a co-location facility, for example. When disaster strikes, you can actually fail over using Snapshot Replication, relink your Active Backup for Business data, and spin up a VM of that critical infrastructure at that co-location facility, either in Synology's Virtual Machine Manager or another platform like VMware. You can then use SRM and SRM 1.3 and the VPN Plus server inside of that to establish a secure site-to-site VPN between the two locations, at which point you can continue working. That's how Synology Router Manager will integrate with your disaster recovery plan. So let's go ahead and check this out in action. We're going to use all of these different applications in unison to establish a secure connection to off-site resources. So here we are in Synology Router Manager, SRM, and we have our VPN Plus server open, and we have our admin console ready to go. Now, before we get started in the whole recovery scenario, we want to show you where you can set up your site-to-site VPN. So in the site-to-site VPN tab, you can add in your profile manually, and you're only going to have to do this on one side of the relationship, because after you change these settings, you're going to export this profile and import it on the other side so all of your settings line up. Now you can name your profile and even type in some pre-shared keys so that it authenticates the relationship whenever you import and connect. Now below that is where you're going to type in your outbound IP and your remote site IP settings. And these are IPs that are your external IPs you actually get from your internet service provider. This can also be done through fully qualified domain name. There's also a tab for encryption and that kind of thing, but we actually left a lot of that default for our relationship. Now that we've shown you what our whole site-to-site VPN looks like, you can see that it's connected back to our remote site and there is some traffic moving through it. Now hopping back over to the Synology NAS, that is our primary site in this case, we have a backup already occurring inside of Active Backup for Business for this Windows 10 desktop PC you see here. Now on this specific device, we've actually also replicated it to a secondary device that's a little bit more powerful at a co-location facility, or a stand-in for that. This is going to be sending this data over to our lab. Now as we transition over here, we're now on the secondary NAS, the destination for that replication task, and we'll be restoring utilizing this Active Backup for Business instance here, and we'll be relinking this data in just a moment. So to get this data live at the secondary location, we're going to go ahead and reach into Snapshot Replication and perform our failover. So we're going to open up Snapshot Replication, and we're going to head right down to Recovery in our case. And now that we're in recovery, we're going to scroll down to the folder that we actually sent those backups to in the first place, and you can see that that is our spot-srm folder. And we're going to force a failover in our case because we are good to go. The relationship is still working correctly, but we still want to show you this functionality. So now that we've forced that failover, it's now brought that Active Backup for Business data live at this secondary location. So to actually bring it into that Active Backup instance at our destination here, we're going to open Active Backup for Business Backup. We're going to head down to the Storage tab, and we're going to click the Relink button at the top. Right whenever you click Relink, you're going to see one of those folders is pretty familiar, the Spot SRM one. So we're going to relink this folder so we have that Active Backup for Business data for that PC that we actually backed up. Now once that relink is complete, we can go into the PC tab, and you'll notice that we have our Spot SRM task already available inside of this secondary Active Backup for Business instance. And you can see our versions were also brought over, of course. Now what we're going to do is go ahead and hop back over to the device and actually perform a restore. So we're going to highlight the device, click Restore, and most of the time you might do a file or folder level restore, and if you click Entire Device, this is actually going to be for creating your bootable recovery media. But we want to spin this device up at the secondary site. So we're going to click More and promote it to a physical server category. And it drops this device into a physical server category in our list and gives it all of the functionality to actually be spun up at this secondary location. And we're going to spin it up this time inside of Synology's Virtual Machine Manager. And next, after we select that destination, we're now going to choose where in our Virtual Machine Manager environment we want this new VM to actually live. And so we're going to choose some storage. We can go ahead and rename this VM if we want to. We can choose how large of storage we want to actually give it, and a couple other settings. But most of the things we're going to leave here is just really keeping things default. We just need to spin this up as quickly as possible in our case. Lastly, we're going to assign power management privileges to myself so I can turn it on and off. And we're going to go ahead and begin this import process. Now in just a few moments, once this Spot SRM desktop is actually done importing, we'll be able to connect to it after it powers on and begin utilizing it at the secondary site. Now we're going to go ahead and click the Connect button, and this is going to open up a web console for this VM to show you it is running at our secondary location, at our disaster recovery location. So that means that our recovery utilizing Active Backup for Business and Snapshot Replication was complete and it was successful. So we're going to hop back over to our first Synology NAS to show you that it can actually see that other device and that we can actually communicate with that secondary network. You'll notice our first desktop right here, it has a 10.1.0.16 address, which lines up with our original server that we actually replicated from at our primary site. But it can also see a new desktop the 192.168.1.125 address. That is showing that this NAS at our primary site is seeing that secondary desktop that we just spun up at that secondary site through our site-to-site VPN tunnel. Likewise, you can do a lot of other great things utilizing this site-to-site VPN tunnel. Even if you weren't utilizing it for a disaster recovery scenario, we can even set up a replication task to go only through that specific site-to-site VPN tunnel. So as we work through this snapshot replication wizard right here, we're going to type in the local IP address of the secondary site's NAS, and we're still going to be able to access it. So we're going to continue to use our encrypted connection, make sure our ports are good, and once we hit next here, we're going to be all authenticated and now able to utilize this NAS at the secondary location through the VPN tunnel. And that's really how powerful the whole VPN Plus server is. You have all kinds of features available to you, from Synology specific VPNs to open standards like OpenVPN, and even a powerful site-to-site VPN tool that can help you in your disaster recovery scenarios. So we went over quite a bit today, so let's go ahead and recap. We started off today by looking at the hardware architecture of the RT6600AX router and the different mesh options available to the Synology router ecosystem. Keep in mind, there's an accompanying app that helps you manage your router on the go, and that is DS Router. You can do things like grant safe access requests and toggle your VPN directly from the app itself. This app was recently updated alongside SRM whenever it came out with 1.3, so it's a perfect match for managing your router on the go. We also took a look at Safe Access, which is a great way for you to set up controls for how people actually utilize your networks. We then took a look at VPN Plus, which is a powerful VPN server, and how this can integrate into your disaster recovery plan. Lastly, we took a look at 802.1q VLAN support inside of SRM 1.3 and how you can utilize this new feature in your environment. Now, if you need any additional help, definitely go out to our Synology Partner Online training page. That is where you registered for this event. We have a whole library of content there and links to YouTube videos to go in depth on a wide range of topics. Also, you can utilize our knowledge base, which is the ultimate library for all things Synology. All of our knowledge lives there. Also, if you need any help past that, past what the knowledge base can provide and past what the spot page can provide, you can always send us an inquiry and our highly trained inquiry team will get your questions answered. Now, if you need to reach out to us, business users, go ahead and reach out to onboarding@synologyamerica.com. And if you're a channel partner, reach out to sac_sales@synology.com and we'll get you in touch with your account manager. With that said, we're about wrapped up for today. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.